Hi, I'm your host. And an epic middle finger to his folk followers. Dylan wanted to rock out with the band, and that's exactly what he did. But the backlash was ferocious. When the band hit the stage and let loose with their electric guitars, booming drums, and powerful bass, Dylan's folk-loving fans were stunned, and not in a good way. They responded by booing, heckling, and even throwing stuff at the band. The tension reached a fever pitch when one fan screamed "Judas," accusing Dylan of selling out and betraying his folk roots. At this point, all the backlash and public hate became too much to ignore. As it turned out, not everyone in the band could survive this immense pressure from the public. The heat was too much for drummer Levin Helm, who ultimately bailed on the tour. The group would have been heartbroken at his decision, but it was more than understandable given the level of criticism. Despite the chaos, Dylan, Danko, and the remaining bandmates powered through, growing tighter with every show. Not only did their playing improve, but they also formed a bond, like warriors in the trenches. As Robbie Robertson put it, "Bob didn't budge, the world was wrong, and we were right." One wild night, after dropping some hard partying, Rick Danko poured his heart out to Dylan, saying that he was destined for bigger things, which is pretty brave considering that Bob was basically his boss. And Danko wasn't just being arrogant either. He had been playing long enough to know that he was on to something, not too long after that heart-to-heart disaster hit like a wrecking ball. Bob Dylan suffered a brutal motorcycle accident, throwing everything into chaos. Suddenly, the band was adrift. After Dylan's devastating accident, Danko summed it up perfectly, saying, "Bob broke some bones in his neck and was in total recuperation mode. We didn't know where Levin was. We were road musicians without a road to go on." Just when it seemed like Danko was stuck in a rut, he found himself in Woodstock, where Dylan was recuperating. Life in the countryside gave Danko plenty of room to breathe. But one fateful night proved that even idyllic mountain living had its dangers. At a certain point, he became a little too drunk and a little too high, which was when he decided to get behind the wheel and race one of his fanmates through the twisting mountain roads. What could possibly go wrong? As the fog thickened and the countryside blurred past, Danko floored it, desperate to catch up with his friend. Bad move. On a hairpin turn, the cast slid out of Danko's control. He desperately slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. He likely saw his life flash before his eyes right before he plowed into a tree. What followed was a harrowing ordeal that would leave him fighting for his life. They say that isolation can be one of the greatest things about the country, but it can also be one of the most dangerous. After the crash, Danko's shattered car lay hidden in the woods, and for 6 hours he sat unconscious, critically injured and bleeding out. It was just pure luck that the band's manager eventually stumbled upon the wreck. When he pulled out Danko's battered, blood-soaked body from the car, he jolted awake, screaming in pain and terror. The human body is an amazing thing. Danko's initial shock and adrenaline got him back home and then to the hospital, but when that hat wore off, reality came crashing down in waves. Racked with unbearable pain, he screamed in agony and confusion, desperate to know why he couldn't move. When he finally convinced a nurse to explain what was wrong, her answer hit him like a freight train. Danko's relief at surviving quickly turned to horror when he learned the extent of his injuries. His neck and back had broken in 6 places, and he'd narrowly avoided losing his right eye. Lucky to be alive? Sure, but he was also drowning in guilt. When his bandmates visited, Danko broke down, tearfully apologizing for derailing everything. The band was tighter than family, so hiring a replacement for Danko was never really an option. Still, with their entire future on pause, the pressure on him to recover was immense. Battered but unbroken, Danko and the band eventually made their concert debut in San Francisco in 1969, and the psychedelic hippie haven didn't even know what hit it. In a sea of tie-dye and surrealism, There were a bunch of dudes wearing flannel, playing fiddles and accordions, and singing about the beauty of small-town life. Audiences may not have quite got it at first, but music from the Big Pink became a commercial and critical triumph. Danko and company weren't just breaking the mold, they were creating an entirely new one. In 1974, Bob Dylan and the band joined forces for a massive world tour, and this time around, the group got to play a set of their own tunes as well. With sold-out shows and venues that were bigger than anything they had ever played, the stakes were sky-high. But at this point, it was obvious that Danko's work-hard, play-harder lifestyle was catching up with him. It's well known that with fame and success come temptations, and for many groups, the pressures of the spotlight lead to a spiral of indulgences. Sadly, the band was no exception, and Robbie Robertson was getting frustrated at watching his friends binge drink and dive into the dark world of harder substances. Robertson admitted that he felt helpless in the face of this monster. The cracks in their brotherhood were starting to show. As much as he loved his brothers, he knew it was time to chart a new course. His exit plan? A grand farewell concert for the band on Thanksgiving Day in 1976. To drum up excitement, the group appeared on Saturday Night Live a few weeks before the big event. Their farewell concert wasn't just any goodbye, it was a full-circle moment, held at the same San Francisco venue where it all began in 1969. The star-studded event made for a memorable Thanksgiving. Speaking of star-studded, legendary director Martin Scorsese filmed the event, turning it into one of the greatest rock documentaries of all time. But the behind-the-scenes action was more dramatic than anything on screen. Scorsese himself later admitted that he was using nose candy heavily during the shoot, and tensions within the band were about to boil over. Some members were bitter about the film spotlighting Robbie Robertson, but a few outsiders noticed that Danko quietly captured the spotlight. Bernie Taupin, Elton John's legendary songwriting partner, even wrote a letter to Rolling Stone saying, "I don't think I've ever seen Rick look that good. He was trim, fit, and handsome, and played and sang beautifully. Demons may have chased him and consumed him years later, but on that glorious night he looked like a rock-and-roll angel." After the band called it quits, Danko kept himself busy and was the first member to release a solo album. Unfortunately, without his band of brothers by his side, he wasn't able to capture the same magic, and the album flopped, which would have been incredibly disappointing. The good thing is, he wasn't alone. His friends were feeling exactly the same way. Maybe it was nostalgia, or an attempt to reignite the spark of their glory days. For whatever reason, the band decided to get back together, but this time without Robbie Robertson. By the 80s, the group wasn't exactly the powerhouse that once was grabbing headlines and playing to sold-out stadiums. It was clear that each member was still fighting their own personal demons. None more than pianist Richard Manuel, who was really struggling with his mental health at the time. But few could have predicted the tragedy of what would come next. An incident so horrible, it would scar Danko and the band forever. One night while playing the Cheek-to-Cheek Lounge deep in an Orlando suburb, things took a very dark turn. After the show, Manuel took a desperate step inside the bathroom of the Quality Inn, while his wife was asleep in the next room. That same morning, his wife woke up, and when she didn't see her husband, she assumed he was already on the tour bus. But when she went into the bathroom, she made a horrifying discovery. Manuel had taken his own life. Overcome with shock, she screamed and ran to find Danko and Helm. When they got to the room, they faced a nightmarish scene. Their beloved bandmate's lifeless body was found hanging from the curtain rod. It took a shell-shocked Danko and Helm 5 excruciating minutes to get their friend down. Once they managed to free Manuel, they put him on the bed, and Danko's wife tried desperately to revive him. But it was no use. For Danko, the devastating loss only fueled his struggles with substances, sending him further down a destructive path. At Richard Manuel's funeral, he paid tribute to his bandmate in a way that no one would forget. As he performed "I Shall Be Released," one of Manuel's most famed songs, he turned to the mourners and asked them to join him in singing the choruses. When the raw, heartfelt tribute was over, there was not a dry eye in the room. In just a few short years, Danko would face yet another devastating loss. His wild lifestyle cast a long shadow, and his son Eli followed in his father's footsteps. While attending college, Eli went on a drinking binge that ended in an unthinkable tragedy. According to his dorm mates, Eli had been at a party where he consumed 151 proof booze. By 2 a.m., he was very inebriated and stumbled back to his dorm room. A few hours after Eli had returned to his room, his friends tried to wake him, only to find that he had choked on his own vomit in his sleep. The coroner later remarked that Eli was so inebriated that when he went to get sick, he probably didn't even realize that he was sick. The devastating incident underscored the tragic toll of excess on the Danko family. These shocking events left fans wondering how much heartbreak can one person take. For Rick Danko, music was a lifeline, but it wasn't always enough to quiet his demons. His addiction often took center stage, and the struggle to get his medicine followed him, especially on tour. In the late 90s, while performing in Japan, Danko thought he had a foolproof plan to feed the monkey on his back. Spoiler, it didn't work. His wife tried to smuggle the seriously illicit substance to him in Japan by tucking it into a magazine and shipping it via courier. Unfortunately, Japanese authorities intercepted the package, and they were not amused. Danko's reckless plan not only earned him a 10-week stint behind bars, but it also put a big damper on his ability to tour internationally. That run-in with the law was the wake-up call he needed to ditch the needles and start living clean. But as many addicts know, trading one vice for another is an all-too-common trap. For Danko, that new vice was food. By 1999, his transformation was shocking. Tragically, his attempt to lead a healthier life only brought new struggles. A former producer of Danko's, who saw him perform that year, estimated that his weight had ballooned to 350 pounds, and the toll on his health was undeniable. A journalist at his show on December 7th said Danko had to stop the show and retreat backstage to catch his breath. No one in the audience that night could have known they were witnessing his final performance. It was then that a journalist sat down with him for what would become a bittersweet interview. They noted that Danko chained smoke through their conversation. His complexion was shallow and his voice raspy. Despite his declining health, Danko's spirits remained high. When asked about the future, he smiled and said, "I'm making music, you know. I've got 3 different record projects that I'm working on right now." Tragically, he would never complete those projects. Just days later, the world would lose the soulful voice of the band forever. On December 10, 1999, just one day after celebrating his 56th birthday, Danko's wife made a heartbreaking discovery. She found him lifeless in bed at their home near Woodstock. The years of hard living had finally caught up with him, and he passed away peacefully in his sleep. It was a quiet end to a turbulent life. As heartbreaking as his passing was, it's undeniable that Rick Danko left an impression on everyone who crossed his path. His bandmates remembered him with deep admiration and affection. Garth Hudson praised his 3 standout talents: playing the bass, singing, and being a humorist. Robbie Robertson described him as the most outgoing, spiritually uplifting member of the band. Even Ronnie Hawkins remarked on his infectious happiness. An undeniable talent, cementing his place as a beloved figure in music history. Beyond his musical talents, Rick Danko is fondly remembered for his generosity, along with his great humility and a certain childlike innocence. Though he's no longer with us, his legacy speaks for itself, and his music will remain for years and years to come. If you enjoyed this Factor 8 video, Give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want to say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.